Don't tell anyone that. Aha, there we go. Chapter 12, if you go back to in verse 1, it's this therefore, and since everything he's talked about, it's a conclusion and a big exhortation. Therefore, since we've got this new and living way, we're going to go to heaven. And it's just, if you just hang in there, he said, let us run this race that's set before us with endurance. What does everyone need? Endurance. And that's just this keep on keeping on, because sometimes running a race is hard. Who's ever run a marathon here? Raise your hand. Oh, yeah. Well, how many are you up to now? 8 marathons. Who's run a half marathon? Really? Just Ann's the only one?
No, I've done a half.
Oh, really? You ran a half? Were you awake or dreaming?
I was awake.
All right, good. Well, I'm impressed because Pam ran one too, but because I don't think I could go that far. But they say when you're pushing it hard, your knees start to wobble. Do they sometimes? They don't want to do what they're supposed to do and get up. You got to talk to your feet, get up, move forward. You hit that wall, I know in a marathon, right? You hit a wall. But you need endurance to complete it.
Yes.
Endurance.
Yes.
That's right. And that's what we're talking about here. Life is like a marathon, and it's not to the whoever finishes first. You just have to finish. That's all that God wants you to do is finish. And so lay aside all the encumbrances and sin, but just don't quit. And so then he talked about the discipline. You know, God disciplines those he loves. Sometimes he brings it for our training because, and let me ask you this question. When an athlete goes through some physical training, that's what the word discipline means, does it make him slower or faster? Is that the purpose of his training? It's supposed to make him faster and have more endurance and stronger, right? And often we look at trials and discipline and as, oh, it just slows me down. I can't do this. No, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to make you stronger so you can run faster and run longer. And that's really what God does. And so he says, let us run this race with endurance. It's been set before us. And that takes us all the way to where we left off in verse 14. And we just want to just really quickly review that so you can all be caught up. Because we spent a long time last week in verse 14. Pursue peace with all men. And pursue means chase after. When they're persecuting someone, they would chase after in order to catch them. Same word here. This is a goal worthy of having. Now, remember the first and second greatest commandments. What were they? The first one? Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? Second one? Well, these in this verse are going to have both those commands, but in reverse. The first thing is, you be at peace with everybody as much as it depends upon you, Paul says in Romans 12. You love your neighbor, okay? Because God extended peace with you. You go out of your way to try to make peace with others. And we spent a lot of time on that. The second part is pursue the sanctification, which without no one will see the Lord. So this is about loving God. This is directed this way. And so we'll spend a little time talking about this idea of sanctification because sometimes we're confused because isn't God the one that makes us holy? Yes. And it's by his grace. But now, since I'm going to live with him then, we try to live like him right now. And that's just reasonable, right? If you know you're going to live with the holy God, we try to clean up our act as much as we can in preparation to live with him eternally. And that's what it's talking about. You can't continue to live in the lifestyles that he saved you from and expect, to live with him then. And so we looked at this idea of three-step process. And again, I'll just review it real quick. That justification is when God separates you from the guilt of your sin. That's when we're saved. Baptism, washing away your sins. A rebirth, and you're born again like a newborn child, right? Then we live a life of sanctification. That's our part with God's help and the Spirit leading us. So it's a joint effort. God does all this, right? The justification. This is a joint work here where I separate myself from the life of sin. That's what he's talking about. I'm already saved, so I'm trying to live like it. So that's why Peter said, be holy. God says, for I'm holy. In other words, live a life of holiness, all right? And then the last stage is where we're looking for, and Sunday night we're going to talk about heaven and just this idea of going home in glory. That's the last step, is when we're separated from sin and its presence. We don't have to fight anymore. That's when the race is done. We're home in glory. Now, the saddest part is if people are right here on the last curve, going into the straight stretch home, and then they quit. Wouldn't that be sad? But yet, that's what a lot of these Hebrew readers were doing. And they were quitting. They're going back. They're going back to their old Jewish customs, because that's what the book of Hebrews is addressed to. Jewish people who left Judaism and now have become Christians. And the temptation is to go back. And so he says, don't. Run that race with endurance. So now we're going to see in verse 15 through 17. That's the only three verses we'll look at. There's three things that he wants to make sure we eliminate or don't go to in our life. So let's read it, then we'll talk about it. All right? So verse 15. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. And that there be no immoral person or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it with tears. Now, I want you to see how three things are introduced by the words, see to it that no. See that? What's the first one in verse 15? No one comes short of the grace or falls short of the grace. What's the second one? No root of bitterness. And the third one? No immoral, godless person. So those are the three things that he's warning us about, and they're all going to be connected, and they all have to do with falling short or not running the race. It's all have to do with quitting. And so we want to see that. No one comes short of the grace of God. No root of bitterness springs up. No immoral, godless person. Okay? And it's easy just to read through these and just not really get anything out of it. So we're going to try to slow down and make some sense of it. First of all, see to it. Now in the Greek, it's very picturesque. And sometimes in English, they can't capture the words in the Greek, the picture of it. So they say, well, see to it or make sure. What does your Bible say other than see to it? Looking careful. That's good. What else? Diligently looking. All right. Okay, they're trying to cast the essence of this, capture it. It's this word episkopeo, and that's interesting because, where's Jack Barrett? What do we call Jack as far as his position in the church? An elder. What else do we call him? It's a synonymous term, but has anyone ever called you bishop? Hey, Bishop Jack. All right. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so elder, they're all going to do this now. Elder means he's older, right? He's old? No. It means he's mature Christian, right? That's what an elder means. And it's a presbyter, the Greek word. And then sometimes we call him an overseer. You remember that? And then the other word is what? A shepherd, right? Now, it's the same person, but it shows three characteristics of his job. He's a mature Christian, so he can lead you to become mature yourself as a shepherd, and he watches over the flock, oversee, looks out over it to protect it, keep it from harm. The Latin word for this is bishop. And Marty's going to get rid of these blue ones because they don't work anymore, right? I mean, Artie. Yes, Marty. Artie. Sorry. Artie. Bishop. So that's why it's okay to call Jeff and Jack Bishop. Hey, Bishop Jeff. But we don't use that. It's just not normal. But it's the word overseer, and that's the word episkopeo. It's the same word that is used, in 1 Peter 5. Shepherd, talking to the elders, this word, the flock among you, exercising oversight. You're watching out carefully. Because it's serious. It's a serious job being an overseer. Because if something happens to the flock, it's going to be held to your account. Now he's taking that type of thinking and applies it to every one of us. Make sure you watch out. All of us. Now why would God tell us to watch out for something? What's the obvious answer? It's a warning because it's a real problem that people fall to. All right? And so when you go to the dentist, what does he tell you to do? Watch out. Yeah, that's right. He says, brush your teeth. Why does he tell you to brush your teeth and make sure you floss? So you don't have to come. Yeah, because you're going to get cavity, and they tell you. You go to the doctor, what do they tell you every time for your checkup? Exercise, you need to lose some weight. All right, thank you. All right. Now, they tell you those things because that's a problem we all have, and that's what we're seeing here. These are some things that afflict Christians and cause them to quit. All right? So that's why we're setting it up. It's all in the word see to it. All right? Or watch diligently. Look out. Now, the first one is that no one comes short. So we got to talk about this word. What does your Bible say other than come short? Fall short. That's good. Anything else? All right, let's look at that word. It literally means to fail to fulfill a goal, to lack and unable to meet the need at hand because you're depleted. You're all run out. You ever felt that way? I just can't finish. So, a marathon runner, they're on mile 20. They're feeling really good. Mile 22, and it hits them. And they're all run out. And they quit. Did they finish the marathon? No. They might have been mile 24 even. But they fell short. You see, that's what God doesn't want to happen. Some of us, are in the middle of the marathon. Life is a marathon. Some of us are towards the end. He says, just don't quit. You need endurance. Well, one of these things that will make you quit is you fall short of the grace of God. And we'll explain that in a second. But that's what it's talking about. It's interesting, Mark chapter 10. Remember the young rich ruler came to Jesus, said, what do I need to do in inherit eternal life? And he said, well, what do the commandments say? And he said, well, I've done those things. He said, well, one thing that you lack, and he uses this word, one area in which you fall short is right here. And what did he tell him to do? Yeah, sell your possessions, give to the poor, then come follow me. Because that person had an undue affection and trust in money to take care of him rather than God. And he needed to get rid of that. And yet he wasn't willing to do it. He agreed because he owned much, it says. Same word there. It's interesting in Romans chapter 3. All have sinned and fallen short. Same word of the glory of God. Now, I'm going to talk about this real quickly. The glory of God. What makes God glorious? He's sinless. What makes him glorious? He's pure. What? He's omnipotent. Knows everything, all-powerful. All right, so who should we talk about? Oh, Dean. If Dean was sinless, in other words, and usually when you think sinless, I haven't been doing the bad things, thou shalt nots, right? So have you killed anyone this week? All right, good. All right. No drunkenness, no murder. I haven't lied. I haven't stolen. So if you got rid of all the thou shalt nots, where does that put you? Zero. You're at ground zero. You're finally doing what you're supposed to not do. You finally got your head above water. But are you glorious yet? No. You're just at ground zero. So what makes God glorious? Yeah, he doesn't do the bad things. What makes him glorious? He does everything loving, perfectly good. When someone needs help, he runs to them. He's sacrificial. He always speaks the truth. He's so glorious because I can never think like him. I never act like him. I never use every moment like he would use it. Can you say that we fall so short? Because James says to know the right thing to do and not do it, it is sin. So here's God's glorious. He does everything perfectly. And where are we? Well, I didn't sin today. We think didn't do a bad thing. But how far did we fall short of his glory? Well, any moment, it's miles, isn't it? On my best day, I'm still so far from him. Now, what makes up for that in one word? The distance between where I am and his glory. Grace makes up for the difference. All right? Yes?
Well, in each of these instances, it's the example is like physical. You fell short physically. You didn't do something.
Yes.
But look, that word is also used when they ran out of wine.
Oh, very good. The wine gave out.
And it was that you didn't have enough of something. And
That's right.
Of everything that he's been talking about, you don't have enough faith to finish the race here on earth.
Right. The Luke 15, remember the prodigal son? He spent all of the inheritance that he insisted having, and he was in need. You know what it means? He ran out, is what it means. He had nothing to eat, so he just wanted to eat the slop the pigs were eating. Yeah, so it has a lot of different connotations. So when we capture that, make sure no one comes short of what in this text? The grace of God. What does that mean then? The word grace has been used in the Hebrew letter a lot of times, so we need to go back and review it. By the grace of God, Jesus came and became a human so that he could taste death for everyone. So he could understand what it's like to live a life on this earth and to be tempted and yet not sin, to suffer and learn obedience by the things he suffered. It was all by God's grace. He had him do that so you don't have to die. The second thing, let us draw near, therefore, to the throne of grace that we might receive mercy and find grace in the time of when I'm about ready to fall short. I'm run out. I can't go another step. Who do you cry to if you're going to cry? If you're going to whine or complain, who do you cry to? Jesus. And he's going to run to your aid because I understand. Yes?
Well, and the thing, when you do go to Jesus and you cry to him, he understands because he's already been through it. So he was a suffering Savior. He experienced everything that you could experience in pain and suffering, all because of us, so that when we do face those trials, we can go to him.
That's right.
He already understands. He's been there.
Exactly. And if you go back to a life of sin, in other words, you don't pursue sanctification. That was Hebrews chapter 10, verse 26. What does he say there? If you go on sinning willfully after receiving knowledge of truth, there's no longer any sacrifice for sins. He says, what kind of judgment do you think you're going to get when you trample underfoot the Son of God and you insult the Spirit of grace? By his grace, he made up the difference in your sinfulness and made you pure and holy, and then you go right back to the same sin? What an insult to God. And so that's how it's been used. And so he, in chapter 13, we'll look later, he said, our hearts can be strengthened by grace. So what do you think it means to fall short of the grace of God? What do you think it means?
I think when, in the context of what's being said here, seeing that, look carefully lest anyone fall short, it's staying focused on the fact that you need to be continually meditating, thinking upon the commitments you made when you became a child of God.
Okay.
And to follow that to the best of your ability, and don't fall short of it. Continue to pursue it, continue to move forward in your life, and don't go backwards.
Okay. All right. Good. Yes, Dean?
Well, there's a lot of research that was done on how expectations affected behaviors, particularly with kids in elementary school. And if a teacher expects a student to do well, typically the student does well. If the teacher expects a student to be a failure, many times the student fails. So when we fall short of the grace of God, it's as if his grace is what allows him to have this expectation of us.
Mm-hmm.
I saved you. I took care of all that stuff. So I know you're a good person. So now you're falling short of his expectation for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it'd be part of that. That's certainly it. Because if he paved the way to be in heaven, and all you got to do is finish the path.
Well, he expected you to.
That's right.
To be able to.
And it's possible. He's doing all the work. You just got to keep on keeping on. And when you fall short of his grace, it's like it's almost a slap in his face. Like, you're not going to take care of me. So
where did that come from?
That's right.
What on earth could have
That's right.
gotten in the way?
Now, later in this chapter, he'll say that the only way we can serve God is with an attitude of gratitude. And we'll get that, see, last verse in chapter 12. In other words, when I understand what he's actually done for me, I am so grateful I would do anything for him. I serve him not because I have to, not because I fear him, because I'm so grateful. And when you have that gratitude, you would do whatever you can for him. And when you quit, you're falling short of his grace. You're looking at it as though it's worthless, it's not that valuable. And there's no more gratitude. And it's a slap in his face. And so he says, make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God. Now remember in chapter 4 and verse 1, let us fear while a promise remains of entering his rest. For us, that's heaven. He was using the physical example of Jews entering the promised land. Lest any of you should come short of it. Same word. Now, why did they fail to enter the promised land? There was 2 reasons given. Lack of faith, and what? Well, that's true, but in the text,
Well, it says fear there.
well, yeah. They failed to enter because of lack of faith and because of disobedience. That's what it said. They're the same thing. When you trust God enough, you're going to obey him. And sometimes obeying him means you have to suffer, and that's how you learn obedience. And so that's one way you could fall short of the grace. Chapter 10, verse 38. My righteous ones, God says, shall live by faith. They trust him and not themselves. And that's what happens. A lot of people haven't given themselves over to God, and they start thinking, what am I going to do? They're trying to fix and manage things themselves. But trust, or true faith, gives it all up to God. I know I'm going to heaven. What's the only reason I know I'm going to heaven? Because he promised me. That's it. It's just that simple. You mean there's not anything I got to do or formally I got to say or a certain amount of prayers? No. Why are you going to heaven? Because he promised you he would. Now you just got to trust him enough to follow him. Now if he shrinks back, same idea, come short. My soul's no pleasure. If you quit, just trust me. Just trust me. Yes?
In that shrinking back, I think that goes right into the next piece of it, because that's where the root of bitterness enters into that individual.
That's right. Good. Now, Titus chapter 2, and that's a good segue to where we're going. I like this verse because it kind of encapsulates all this. The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. True? Anyone that comes to him. It's a free gift. But grace also does some teaching. What does it teach us? To deny ungodliness and worldly desires. Because they're going to cause you to shrink back. They're going to tie you to this world, and your anchor is pulling you where? Our anchor's in heaven. That's where our security is. So you got to deny that and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly. See, that's your sanctification. Pursue it. Because you're going to live with him, so start living like him right now. It's not because you're trying to be goody two-shoes. because you're packing your bags and you're going to heaven. All right. So, any questions about that? So the first one is see to it that no one falls short of the grace that's been given you. Take advantage of it. Be grateful. The second one is what? No root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many are defiled. All right. So, who's the grammar expert here? Really? Yeah, you? All right. Okay, I'll just ask you this question. The love of God. Is that my love for God, or is that God's love for me? The love of God. Grammatically, it can mean either one. The love of God. Is that your love of God? In Romans 8 says the love of God will never be separated from the love of God. Well, that sounds like his love for me. Same thing here. The root of bitterness. Is that the root that is actually bitterness? Or is it a root that produces bitterness? Yes. Yeah, yes. All right. Now, depends on how you view it, you're going to talk about this verse in a different way. And generally, we're going to get to the same place, taking both positions. But make sure you watch out. Remember, we're overseeing our life. We're taking inventory. Uh-oh, there's a root, and I got to rip it out. Why? Because it's going to bring bitterness, and it's going to defile those around me. So I'm always watching out. I don't want to fall short of God's grace. I always want to be grateful and keep on keeping on. And if there's a root of bitterness, I just got to yank that baby out of there because it'll ruin me just that quickly. So, with relationships, we can go, oh yeah, I've seen a root of bitterness. It's ruined a lot of marriages. Is that what he's talking about here? But is it true? Will faults or expectations that are not met, you talked about that, and hurt and pain, if it's not resolved, will it grow into a bitter spirit that'll defile you and defile your relationships? Absolutely every time. And will it destroy others? Because you'll spread it to others. It's like a flu virus. Just talking, yeah, did you hear about it? And the bitterness infects other people's hearts and it makes them bitter. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Now that's a great lesson. We could talk about it, but this is a different kind of root of bitterness. Because this is all about falling short of the grace of God. It's all about getting to heaven. And so there's a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 29, I think that'll help us. Because he's writing to Jewish Christians. They were under the Jewish law, right? So they're very familiar with the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the instructions was make sure there's not a man among you, man or woman or family or tribe, whose hearts turns away. Isn't that the whole book of Hebrews? Don't turn back. Don't go back to what you came from. Well, the same danger was there. You turn away from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations, the ones you came from Egypt, from the people around you. Now, what happens when you leave God and serve other gods, whether it's money, power, fame, just pleasure, or just being lazy? Is that a God, being lazy? It's a God of self, right? Of pleasure. It is, really. It's an idol. What happens? So there will not be among you a root of bearing poisonous fruit and wormwood. What was wormwood? Bitter. Bitter. So what was the root of bitterness here?
Well, you can't serve two masters.
It's going to another God.
That's right.
It's getting your eyes off of God and serving some functional idol that you think is going to serve you well, give you some type of security or pleasure or meaning other than God. And it ended up defiling not just your life, the others. Now, the next verse says, oh, there'll be peace. No, there won't be peace. What was the number one cause for the fall of the nation of Israel? Idolatry, unfaithfulness. He called it spiritual adultery. That they loved other gods rather than loving God with all their heart, mind, and soul. Now, we're more sophisticated than they were. We don't bow down to carven images, but do we have a problem with serving false gods? Well, anything that keeps you from seeking God first, whatever it is, becomes a functional idol. Whatever it is. And it can make you bitter then. It'll make your life bitter. And a lot of people that fall away from God, you know who they're most angry at? God himself. And why is that? Because something happened in their life, and rather than looking at their life, what they needed to change and what they needed to do, who do they blame? They blame God. Like, he wasn't there for me. He didn't take care of me. And they get bitter. And you see that bitterness, and it just totally envelops the whole person, and they're just miserable people. And then it starts affecting others. Now, usually they fall away, but sometimes they stay within the church. And he says, you watch out for that. That's why he said in this chapter, you haven't resisted to the point of shedding blood. You haven't suffered like Jesus did. Your training's just beginning. Don't get bitter. What do we say? Get better. Accept the grace of God that he loves you. He's always going to be there for you. Try to learn the lessons, because anytime something bad happens, what's the first thing you're supposed to ask? What is God trying to teach me? That's what you ask. Right? Yes.
Well, when you deal with a person who has been a Christian and they're backslidden and now they're no longer serving God, they love the things of the world more and they begin to hate God.
Yeah.
Because that interferes with what my decision I have made. And they start to shun anything that has to do with God, and they develop a hate.
Yeah, they can.
Because you can love one and you'll hate the other.
And thinking about this defiling it, just the bitterness, how much does it hurt? I don't even have to ask the question, because you know when you see someone fall away, especially when it's a family member, and I keep on talking about my own family, and it really hurts. And it actually discourages other brethren, doesn't it? When other people quit. It discourages them. And it's not like I need you to support my faith, because my faith is my conviction. But is there strength in numbers? Yes. And when someone quits and Satan takes them out, it's so discouraging, isn't it? And that's what happens here. And it causes people maybe to do the same. So this bitterness, I'm not even talk about it, but I want to go to the last one, because I think it's the most interesting. There's the third. What's the first one? Don't fall short of the grace of God. Second one, make sure you're devoted to God. And you keep your priorities straight. You keep running the race, looking to the joy set before you. The third one is, make sure there's no godless or immoral person. And who's the example that he's going to use of a godless and immoral person? Oh, Esau. Let me just set the stage real quick. Now, we know Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had two sons, right? And who's the birthright go to? The oldest. And who was the first one born? Esau. All right, so we had two twins, and Esau and Jacob. Esau was born first. The birthright should have went to him. Now, when you look at it from one point of view, it doesn't really seem fair, because Esau comes in one day from hunting. He was a hunter, and you could tell he was a hairy guy, and his dad probably really enjoyed that, just the, But Jacob was, more of a agricultural type guy, if you would. So he comes in one day and he's famished, and he asks his brother for some porridge. He had some red lentils. And Jacob says, okay, yeah, sell me your birthright, and I'll let you have all you want. Now, does that sound right of Jacob? Like, come on, dude. He's your brother, and you're trying to manipulate this situation. And he says, what good is a birthright if you're dead? Now, wait a second, that's the first clue about where Esau's coming from. So he said, yeah, I'll sell it. Now, does that seal the deal just because two kids, swear to do something? Well, then later what happens? Isaac's old and blind, and he says, Esau, go out and kill this animal and make my favorite meal, and then I'll bless you. The birthright's about to go to Esau, and Jesus is going to come through his lineage, if it all goes through, and the great nation's going to come out of Esau. But who's listening to all this? Mary. The mother. And she goes, Jacob, quick. Go put on his clothes. I'll prepare the meal. And you go in there and act like your brother. And then your dad will bless you and you'll get the birthright. Really? Does that seem right? Who got cheated in all this? Esau. Now, it's easy to look at that and say, well, I don't get this. It seemed like the scoundrel was Jacob, but who does this scripture say was the godless and immoral man? Esau. So let's look at it in a different perspective then. He says, you make sure there's nobody, and who's he speaking about when he says, make sure there's nobody? He says, look at yourself. That you're not godless or immoral. The word immoral is the word we get pornography from, porneia, and it's the word for fornication. Here's our first clue. This guy was just a sexually immoral person. Who says so? Right here. God says so. We're not revealed that in the book of Genesis, but we learn it here. The second thing is godless. The word godless means to pass over the threshold. What? Well, here you have the temple and the tabernacle. Everything inside was what? Holy, set apart for God's use. When you cross the threshold, you're in the realm of the common, the ungodly. And that's a word that they be used to describe people that aren't living a sanctified life. So not only was he immoral, he just had an ungodly attitude about everything about life. And think about it. How did he respect his birthright? Because that was a big deal in their day, a patriarchal system where he is the one that gets to lead the family. He's the one that if they made sacrifice, he's the one that God would talk to. To have the birthright was hugely significantly, and how did he view it? Worthless. He profaned it. Yeah, I'll sell it for a cup of soup. That's what he did. Not only that, when we learn about his lineage, here's Rebekah and Isaac, had Jacob and Esau. They prayed to get these two. And God opened her womb when she was barren. And Esau was a miracle child in many ways. I want you to note that. But Esau marries Judith and Basemath, and they were Hittites. Right then, would we have a problem? See how profane he was? They were not supposed to marry people outsiders. And it says in the text, this brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm tired of living because of the daughters of Heth. It just caused so much discourse and bitterness in their family because he's now following what? False gods. The root of bitterness is defiling the whole family. And who's the root of it? Esau. Esau saw the daughters of Canaan and displeased his father Isaac. So he went to Ishmael and married beside the wives that he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abram's son. Who's Ishmael? Those are their cousins. And this guy was so profane, he had no respect for his family or his heritage or his birthright. That's why he's called a godless person. And you see Christians like that, they don't take anything seriously that has been given to them. This golden blessings from God. And they profane it like, ha ha, Jesus Christ, you know. And they eat the Lord's Supper with sin in their life and on their hands. Godless. He says, make sure that's not you. It'll defile everyone around you. Now, we're not done. The Edomites came out of his lineage. Now, what do we know about the Edomites? They're always a thorn in Israel's side. When they come out of Egypt, they asked to go through their land, and they said, no, you can't. It's like they're always trying to get even for their father Esau, whose birthright was stolen by Jacob. Constant friction. And then from that, we learned that Jacob, on the other hand, his name is changed to, Isaac, Jacob. His name is changed to Israel. And now that came the Israelites, and out of that came Jesus. You know how it came out of Esau's lineage? King Herod, who had all the babies murdered in Bethlehem when Jesus was born. Not only that, Haman was an Agagite or an Amalekite who he plotted to have all Israel destroyed until Esther stood up and saved the nation. It's all because of Esau, the godless and profane man that he was. See how many people were defiled because of him? And so we look at these two, and you say Esau, immoral, profane. He had anger. He was so angry. He wanted to kill Jacob. And you say, well, I can understand. But no, it all came back on Jacob. Did he have a miserable life? His own children lied to him. Remember, they brought the coat of many colors after they dipped in animals' blood. Hey, look, Dad, we found Joseph's coat. Assumed that he had died by a wild animal when actually they sold him into slavery. No, he paid for it. He had a miserable life in many ways. But Jacob was a man of faith. That's what we saw in chapter 11. He was in this hall of fame of faith. And so you look at the two and he says, make sure you're not like Esau. Make sure. 3 things. What? Don't fall short of God's grace. He was going to be the father of a great nation, Esau, if he would have kept his birthright. But he profaned it. He fell short of the God's grace, this free gift. Second of all, make sure there's no root of bitterness. He was a bitter man because he served false gods and he despised everything his family stood for. And 3, make sure you're not godless and profane like Esau. Why does he say those things? Because we're all subject to them one way or another, aren't we? We have to take inventory of our life. The only person that can do that is you and me. I can't do it for anyone else. I can just do it for myself. All right, any questions or comments? So we stop right there. There's a lot in these 3 verses, isn't there? Yeah. See to it, no one comes short of the grace of God. Watch out over your souls because it's really, 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 really serious. All right, thank you very much. More positive things coming up next in the book, rest of the chapter.